Okay, good evening. I am pleased to call this joint work session of the Alexandria City Council and the Arlington County Board to order. My name is Christian Dorsey. I'm chair of the Arlington County Board. Welcome to our Gunston Community Center, and we're thrilled to have all of you in attendance tonight for what we hope will be a productive session talking about potential joint efforts to respond to the incredible amount of investment that we expect in our community. But before we begin, since not everyone in the audience has an opportunity to see the name tags at the table, why don't we go around and make sure everyone who is present announces that you are and who you are. And why don't we begin with the Alexandria City Manager, Mr. Mark Jenks.
Mark Jenks, the Alexandria City Manager.
John Taylor Chapman, City Council Member, Alexandria.
Kenneth Aguirre, City Council, Alexandria.
Del Pepper, City Council, Alexandria.
Matt DeFranti, Arlington County Board Member.
Elizabeth Bennett Parker, Vice Mayor, Alexandria.
Justin Wilson, Mayor, Alexandria.
All right, he's Christian still. Libby Garvey, Vice Chair, Arlington County Board.
Amy Jackson, City Council for Alexandria.
Eric Gutschall, Arlington County Board. I'm glad we're not playing tug of war here. We'd be outnumbered.
Good evening, everyone. Mohammed Saifuldin, City Council, City of Alexandria.
Katie Crystal, Arlington County Board.
Mark Schwartz, Arlington County Manager.
Okay, so with that, we'll spend a few minutes just framing the purpose of tonight's meeting. What is not an unprecedented gathering, but certainly an unusual one. To do that, I would like to turn it over to the Honorable Mayor of the City of Alexandria, Justin Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first of all, am I working here? There we are. Let me thank all of you for being here and taking time out, not just from the two bodies, you guys didn't have a choice, but from the folks in the audience who are here. I think, as Christian said, this is not an unprecedented collaboration, not an unprecedented meeting for us, but it is certainly something we don't do enough, and we probably should do more. And I think we have a great excuse to do it tonight. I think a lot of folks in the lead up to this have been sending us notes expecting that we're going to ink some merger agreement tonight, or we're going to start exchanging property tonight. So if we're exchanging property, just to be clear, I want Namviet, Italian Store, and El Polo Rico. So just we can work we can work that out. We can work that out later. So yeah, see, Sean knew that was not going to happen. But I do want to thank all of you for being a part of this. This is I think the roots of this really go back decades in the history of the collaboration that these two jurisdictions have experienced for a long time. I mean, one of the basic building blocks of the Amazon attraction effort was the Route 1 Transitway, which was a collaboration that really started 20 years ago. It was one of the very first public meetings I ever went to in my civic life in Alexandria. It was a joint meeting between the two communities in planning out what ultimately became the Transitway on Route 1, which was a part of our package. I think we've obviously done a lot of work around 4 Mile Run. We've done work around public safety. That's been a traditional place for regional collaboration. I think the reason we're here, though, is the work we did around economic development was different and groundbreaking in that we weren't competing against each other. We recognized that the sum of our parts was worth more, and ultimately we were successful because of that. Because we said, what are the pros? What are the things, the unique assets that the two communities together have that we can sell, and ultimately we could take all comers around the country when we did that. But I think the hope is now that we were victorious and we have Amazon and Virginia Tech coming here, that we turn the page and turn that same collaboration into an opportunity to ensure that this is successful. I think part of what Christian and I have talked about a great deal during the lead up to this, we've used the word intentional a lot, and we've used the word deliberate a lot. we know that if we are not intentional, if we are not deliberate about how we plan the response to implementing Amazon and Virginia Tech, things will just happen to us. And I think we have an incredible opportunity to get out in front of these things. So in the memo that we put out there, we laid out obviously 5 areas that we think are good places to start. But part of why we're here and why we have all of us here is, what are we missing? What other areas should we be looking at from a policy perspective? And I'm hoping that at the conclusion of tonight, we'll do a couple things. So first of all, we'll agree on the scope, the general scope of the collaboration. We will discuss some of the options for the structure, and Christian's going to get into a little bit more detail on some of the options around what that collaboration looks like and how do we structure it, and then really set a path coming out of here for moving forward. So, we are not, by the end of tonight, by the 4th or 5th inning, going to finalize a collaboration plan for the 2 jurisdictions. But what I'm hopeful we will do is set a direction, set a course that our staffs can get to work and come back to us in all these policy areas with a structure that is going to drive the kind of collaboration that I think we want to see. So I'm very excited about this step. I think it's an important step forward. This is a kickoff. This is a start of a journey for us. And there's a lot of folks rooting for us. I mean, the fact that there is a lot of people in this room, the interest that has been paid to this collaboration, I think there is a lot of folks rooting for us to be successful, and I think we can set a model ultimately for the country about how jurisdictions can accommodate significant growth and make sure it accrues to the benefit of everyone in their community. So that's why we're here, and I'm really excited about the opportunity tonight, and so I want to turn it back to the chairman.
Thank you very much, Mayor Wilson. And I will say, as grateful as I have been to have engaged with Mayor Wilson a lot, not only in preparation for tonight, but in thinking about what were the opportunities that were going to come to our respective jurisdictions after the Amazon announcement, as well as the Virginia Tech announcements around Potomac Yards. I'm very excited that we get to broaden it to our colleagues to really get your input in shaping this, because in the spirit of the whole is better than the sum of its parts, Mayor Wilson and I can only go so far. And it's with your engagement on all of these policy areas and in helping us figure out what is our way forward that will truly do something that I think is transformative for our jurisdictions and our regions. So you all are on sort of the clock tonight. We want your great, wonderful feedback, and we look forward to your earnest engagement. As Justin said, housing affordability, workforce development, pre-K through 12 education, transportation, and mobility, as well as small women and minority-owned business opportunities are sort of the policy areas that we identified. We do want to take your temperature to see whether or not we've got those right. Do we have, are we appreciating all of the dimensions on those policy areas? And of course, what's missing? But then, of course, since we are all problem solvers, we like to get things done, we may naturally gravitate towards, well, what could this collaboration look like? And let's just say that from our conversation and from our engaging other stakeholders, there really is no perfect model that provides a best practice out there for exactly what we should do. So we're not able to really look at an example and say, fine, we'll do that, we'll replicate it here, game over. But there are a few different concepts which have been tried elsewhere, which have been in place in our respective communities that we can draw from for a sense of what might come next. So a few of the options, and by no means was this an exclusive or an exhaustive list, was the concept of setting up a community development corporation. Beyond that name, I want you to think about some of the key features of it as what we might want to noodle over. One, it's an independent organization, so it's not a governmental body, for all of the benefits and the drawbacks that would bring. It can involve a multi-variable list of stakeholders that can include government, but is not an arm of the government. So as such, usually these are organized as 501c3s under the Internal Revenue Code, and they have a great deal of flexibility so long as they are pursuing their mission. So we can set up, or if one is set up, it can have a variety of governance models. It can include just a broad representation of stakeholders, weighted representation of stakeholders. Really, there's a sort of endless number of configurations that you could use. But generally, CDC gets all of the benefits of an independent nonprofit. It's not a public body, but it can also set up financial institutions that support its efforts. These are in place all throughout the country. We certainly have some examples of CDCs in our local jurisdictions, but we see this model more or less replicated in many places when people are engaged in this work. Some people may be curious about redevelopment and housing and redevelopment authorities. Of course, the city of Alexandria has one. You've had one for 8 decades. Arlington does not. And at the risk of running afoul of our county attorney, who will send me a sort of a side eye if I get this wrong, Arlington would have to go through some steps, including a referendum, to enable ourselves to have one. But one of the things that just doesn't really currently exist are for these authorities to operate across jurisdictional lines. So the benefits of a housing redevelopment authority, it's a little bit closer to the arm of government. There's a little bit more government influence over its activities, or at least it could be. One of the principal drawbacks is it's not necessarily the best tool to be a magnet for outside investment from the philanthropic sector or from other investment entities, because it is essentially a public body. And then this is where we get less granular, and that is coming up with some sort of an inclusive growth statutory partnership, which can take whatever form our creativity and resources allow. This is where you think of joint task forces, which include people who are appointed by the respective jurisdictions. It could include all manner of stakeholders, whether they be the Regional Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, the Northern Virginia Regional Commission. It can be whatever you want. I don't even want to go into examples because it could be anything that we set it up to be. Of course, since it could be anything, that means it's a lot more nebulous. But at this point, what we're asking you to do is to not pick which one you like best, but really to have a thorough conversation where we can go through the principles that are important to you, not just from a policy perspective, but from a governance perspective, and then we can let the structure sort of come from there. So we're really looking for you to really think broadly and not specifically, so that we can have a clear direction tonight on what's important to our respective jurisdictions. So that's a lot, and we realize it's a lot to ask of you. One of the things that gives us confidence that we are up to the task is the history of collaboration, successful collaboration that our communities have joined in on. And so to take us sort of through a brief history of that, we'll turn it over to the city manager and the county manager, the Marks, Mr. Jinks and Mr. Schwartz.
Mr. Chair and the Mayor, we've already started collaborating together. We've merged our first names. So there has been I can attest personally, there's a longstanding practice of collaboration between our two jurisdictions. There are many differences between us, but we have much more in common. A long shared border, similar forms of government, urban conditions, similar policy outlooks have helped set the stage for over a long time for successful interjurisdictional collaboration. And I can attest that we're spending 4 decades, first 2 decades with Arlington and 2 decades with Alexandria. That it's, when you get elected leadership on both sides of 4 Mile Run saying it's important to work together to take a common problem and address it, that actions can be taken for the betterment of both our communities. A number of areas that we've worked on. Mark and I are going to go through that. The mayor had mentioned Metroway. It was the first bus rapid transit system in the Washington metropolitan area, and it was really a pioneer. Nobody else had done it, and now we can see all around us, whether it's Montgomery County or whether it's Fairfax County, there are big plans in putting segments, and at some point we'll figure a way to connect those together, and that's really erased the borders between our two jurisdictions when it's come to folks who are in Crystal City, who or Pentagon City, and they want to go shopping, or our residents who basically need to get to work in Crystal City. So in that case, while we individually constructed The two transit ways, staffs work closely together to make sure that basically the pathway was consistent, that it worked well as a system. There's also a collaboration over time. When VRE was created, that took collaboration. Arlington and Alexandria were active with our neighbors in creating the Virginia Railway Express. And the Potomac Yard Metro Station is another example. Hopefully, we'll have a groundbreaking to invite you to in next month, if things work out fine. But that could not have happened with a lot of good work between the two jurisdictions. Our bike and ped network is, I think, one of the better in the region, and I think it scores pretty well in the country. And that's not only a recreational important service for our residents, but also we found during the shutdown it's incredibly important to get people to work. Economic development, as the mayor indicated, is a prime reason why here tonight. And winning that H2Q competition for Amazon and Virginia Tech was a result of unprecedented close collaboration between our two economic development offices and the state, with supporting help from city transportation and county transportation and the housing offices as well. It was a real team effort that led to that result. And what was it? $295 million for transportation, $375 million between Virginia Tech and George Mason for higher ed tech investments, and at least $75 million from the HDA over the next 5 years to address housing affordability. A collaboration has begun to get extended into the public schools, where our school staff have already talked about how we can basically, they can jointly leverage the benefit of our 45,000 public school students, the benefits of Virginia Tech. That cooperation on the H2Q process wasn't new. Our economic development offices had worked together on a small scale, going to events like South by Southwest, where you had a lot of business prospects present, and other site selectors meetings where there were opportunities for both jurisdictions. So we've had a practice of working together, and it resulted just last month in our two jurisdictions basically had been planting the seeds for some time for a regional Northern Virginia joint economic development, joint marketing, and a joint unprecedented regional agreement was signed a couple of weeks ago between basically almost every city and county in Northern Virginia to begin to joint marketing and working together. The tourism folks have worked together over time to promote Northern Virginia. And probably one of the most long-standing joint economic development work that we've done is we've had a joint workforce investment board for many decades, working together to help our residents basically pull themselves up the economic ladder, in whether it's education or training or just plain finding a job. So we've had many successes in transportation, economic development, and a whole lot of other areas.
Thank you, everybody. I wanted to say welcome to the mayor and chair and members of city council and board. And a few things that I wanted to focus on, so then we can get to the main event. Some things that maybe a lot of the people in the audience don't know about. We have had a history of collaborating on some very substantial investments. First example is the waste-to-energy facility, which collaboration began on that in 1984, and it took about 4 years to work out the financing and the agreements involved with that. And it's a joint facility that was paid for and built by both jurisdictions, and it's located, started operations in 1988, and it's located at 5301 Eisenhower Avenue in Alexandria. Arlington County owns about half of the property at that place, so we have a little foothold in Alexandria. So the facility is
non-taxable.
Yes. The facility is currently owned and operated by Covanta, and the current operator agreement runs through 2038, when the property then will revert back to ownership on the part of Alexandria and Arlington. In last fiscal year, the facility processed a little bit under 350,000 tons of municipal solid waste. About 16 or 17% of that came combined from Arlington and Alexandria. Most importantly, that waste was able to generate 142 megawatt hours of electrical generation. It's been doing that since 1988, so going on over 30 years. We have worked jointly in governing that body. There used to be trustees appointed by both boards. Now there's a facility monitoring group, which has 2 representatives from each jurisdiction, which meets on a quarterly basis. They look at data focusing on maintenance and operations. And we also hire independent parties to do inspections of the plant and make sure that the facility is running according to the specifications in the agreement we have with Covanta. Another area which I know a lot of people may take for granted, but is something that I think is actually quite special, is our collaboration in public safety and justice. The first most important part of that is our new fire chief came from Alexandria Fire Department. We appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Your old fire chief lives in Alexandria, so just.
Well, okay. That's why he's the old fire chief, but we'll talk about that later. Our fire department, for each of our departments, provide coverage for the other when needed. And this system of automatic aid, I just wanted to give you an example from last year. Alexandria responded with 1,457 units to Arlington, and Arlington responded with 1,260 units to Alexandria. And beyond the direct aid, we do joint training. We have our paramedics, leadership, and technical rescue programs work closely together. Earlier about a month and a half ago, we, along with the City of Falls Church, teamed up to respond to Hurricane Dorian with a joint water rescue team. And I don't know if some of you were here, but back in November of 2016, which was the last time the county board and city council met, we met along with Falls Church, we began a collaborative effort which is about to go into action next month. And it has a wonky name. It's called Call Processing Equipment 911 CPE, which essentially provides that our 911 center and yours are completely redundant and can back each other up. It took a lot of hard work, and it's the only example we're aware of in the Commonwealth, perhaps in the East Coast, that does that. So that's great work together. Just wanted to spend a minute or two, because I think you'll be spending some time on this later, talking about housing affordability. Mark Jinks talked a little bit about our work during the HQ2 process. We've worked extensively, our housing staffs, between Arlington and Alexandria with the VHDA, which is the Virginia Housing Development Authority, to determine how the funds that were committed, the $75 million over 5 years, how that will be spent. We've worked closely with VHDA to come up with, we're part of a group that came up with the criteria for what are called REACH funds, which are available to jurisdictions affected by the arrival of Amazon. And we've worked together on submitting applications for that, and we expect some awards on those applications that have been put in, hopefully shortly. And we're working together on reviewing existing condominium stock, affordable ownership options, and a range of potential financing tools. Just to close, the mayor already made mention of the 4 Mile Run Joint Task Force. I'll just go through a real quick litany of some other items that we collaborate on. We work together on Nova Parks, the Northern Virginia Justice Training Academy, and we work jointly on supporting nonprofits. And I'm going to stop there. I could have gone on for another 5 or 10 minutes. But with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
So thank you. Certainly a big list, probably some things that we had forgotten about, some things that we probably never knew about, and some things it was great to hear just articulated from our respective city managers. So that was important in framing why we're confident that this is a worthwhile endeavor for us to engage in, and should hopefully give you all every confidence that we can succeed because we have a track record of that. So we thought it was beyond our capability to effectively elicit all of the great content and feedback that we want to get from you colleagues tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Mayor Wilson to introduce someone who is known to city councilors for effectively facilitating productive conversations.
Yes. I also want to thank the Marks for putting that for that presentation, because I think it shows what fertile ground this is. So we are fortunate to have Ray Parks with us tonight. So we have had Ray help us on a number of opportunities on the council to help corral us and get us to action on a variety of different sticky matters, including some of them that are related to what we're talking about tonight. We've definitely, Ray has an extensive history around housing, so I think we're very excited, and I want to turn it over to Ray Parks to help facilitate us. Really keep Dell in line. That's really what this is all about. So.
Thank you. I'm trying to figure out where to stand because we have such a big audience, and so I'm going to apologize already because my back is going to be to somebody at some point tonight. But I'd like to introduce my colleague Naomi, who is going to also help us keep track of time and also document the outcome for tonight. I am looking at the clock. It is 8 o'clock, and we have promised to get everybody out by 9:30. So that gives us an hour and a half to dive a little bit more deeply into the substance of tonight. And before we do that, I thought it would be good to get a sense about who from the two bodies were here at the time the proposal was being put together versus who is here and inherited this and have to now take this all the way. So I'm going to start with mark number 1 on this side, and we're going to go this way, just to get a sense about where folks fit into this conversation.
I was here.
I chaired the Arlington County Board in 2018 when the proposal was announced as well as finalized.
Excellent.
I was there for the announcement.
Okay.
Well, I took office January 1 of 2018, so I would say I was here for the vast majority of it, but certainly things were in motion.
Okay.
I was with Mo.
I was here.
I was here as well.
I was here for all of it.
Like Mo and Amy, I went to the announcement about a week after our election.
Okay.
I was not here, I came after.
I was here.
Inherited.
I was here.
Also here.
All right, so we've got a mix. So that's good. So let's talk about what we're not going to do tonight, just so that we're clear about this, because we've heard about the idea of now that this is here, and it's not just Amazon, right? It's what's happening with George Mason, for example, right? And other issues as well. But this idea of intentional planning, right? So things don't happen to you. You're able to get ahead and to plan for what you would like to see happen, right? So tonight is a big first step, but it is not the last piece, right? And because we only have an hour and a half left, it's about trying to get to consensus on the framework, right? What is it that is going to help you organize the way you work together? And also agreeing on the policy areas to focus on. Those are the two priorities for tonight. I will confirm, and the staff will correct me if I'm wrong, the two marks and others in the audience. Next steps that will come will include discussion around what is the infrastructure that will guide this work, the governance structure, right? The deeper dive in some of those. But we're not trying to do that tonight, right? We're agreeing that there needs to be additional conversation around, well, what are you going to set up? What is it going to look like, right? But that's for a future meeting, right? So two priorities for tonight. It's the framework, and it is also agreeing on the policy areas. All right. So with that, we would like, so you now get to work, right? Because you've been thinking about it. You got the memo, right? Did anybody not get the memo? Both, this one, right? So in here, right, there is the beginning already of a statement of principles, right? And so we just want to remind everybody, just in case it's been a minute since you read it, what is currently in this document. And Naomi's just going to read that out loud so that we remind everybody what we're starting with.
So from the joint memo, it says, we believe this unique opportunity calls for new policy approaches, unprecedented collaboration between our two jurisdictions, and a sense of urgency to ensure that the growth we anticipate from these paired investments is inclusive and benefits the diverse communities in both of our jurisdictions for generations to come.
Great. So the discussion we'd like to have with the joint body now is, one, does that about sum it up? If it doesn't, right, how do you wish to amend this? Or is it something completely different that you would like to come up with tonight? So we have put on your tables, you have notepads, and you've got sticky pads because we need to just think about it a little bit, right? And then write it down. And then we will talk about it openly, about what it is you would like to achieve out of this joint collaboration. Where are you trying to go? Is anybody missing their notepad or paper or a pen? You are? Okay.
It's okay. No, give me a pen. I'll give him a
Again, this is about the principle, the statement of principle. And you have something to start with, so we can go with this, we can change it, we can come up with something different.
I wrote it, so I do like it. But feel free to
And this came, so the mayor and board chair here, this is their handiwork to get us started.
really stinks.
All right, so we're going to give you a minute, and then we'll come back to you. So we are trying to get you to write down the statement of principles that will guide this effort. What do you believe it should be? And the mayor and the board chair has graciously sort of framed something already as a starting point, right? You can agree to this, or you can put something else on the table.
So we've got the first one.
Okay? You can write it on a sticky or you can write it on your notepad. Either way, whichever is easiest for you.
No skinny microphone.
You're still thinking? Okay. Uh-oh, more paper. Anything? Oh, they're bad.
We need it on a sticky?
It doesn't need to be on sticky. She said you can do it on whatever.
Yeah, but then you need Scotch tape.
You could use a sticky to tape it. This is collaboration right here.
All right, we're at it.
There we go.
There we go.
I could fit it on a sticky.
So that's 8. We're missing some.
Yeah. Thank you, Christian.
You're welcome.
I'm missing 2. No? Oh, there we go. Still missing one?
It's me. I'd like to just discuss what's on the.
Okay, that's okay too. All right. So,
I'll totally rework it after we talk about it.
all right, so let's see what we have on here. So, address expected challenges. What do you mean by this? Are there specific challenges that you want to talk about?
So I think as we look at this as an opportunity, I think we also need to understand that our community sees this and not as always a positive frame that we might. And I think we need to look at specific challenges that our community has voiced and using some of these opportunities of joint partnership to address those specific issues, whether it be housing affordability, whether it be the opportunity for future generations to be able to benefit from the jobs and the opportunities that are coming forward. I think shifting our work and shifting how we work together to really look at specific issues that our community has brought forward is part of what we're doing, and I think we need to be, as the two chairs have said, we need to be very definitive about how we say that.
Okay. Anybody disagrees with anything you just heard? Anybody to piggyback on that? Next one. Renewing our shared commitments as well as new policy approaches. We're committed to continued regional leadership and developing a structure.
I'd love to speak to that, Ray. So what that is proposed insertions of language.
Proposed insertions of language. Okay.
Correct. I went straight to the wordsmithing.
I knew somebody would do it.
What I'm trying to get at here is that this effort is not new.
Right.
It's not simply that we've collaborated on public safety and the restoration of 4 Mile Run and waste to energy before, although I think our management did an excellent job of summarizing that. We have either independently worked on or regionally collaborated on each of these priorities, which we'll get to next, but I believe are exactly the right ones. To not honor that work and memorialize it in this mission statement not only undermines the importance of those efforts to date and all who have contributed to them, not only elected officials, but many in this room, but it also could potentially lead us to some wrong, or I believe, wrong conclusions about the right structures.
Okay. All right. So emphasis on renewing.
On renewing with regard to the comment about policy approaches.
Okay.
And then the second comment is should fit under, we are committed to developing a structure for this collaboration. I believe that should also reference not just that we are developing a structure, but that our two jurisdictions are committed to using our existing regional structures.
Got it. Got it. All right.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yes.
Because I was at first a little drawn to the word unprecedented collaboration, and I wonder if the term unprecedented, do you feel that's in tension with what you just described, honoring what the collaboration we've had? And I might be getting way down in the weeds on this, I don't know, but that's just a reaction I had to that.
No, it's a good time to
I
ask.
could respond to it and then yield the floor to others. I think it depends on the issue. I think that to say that we need unprecedented collaboration on transportation, and that's an issue we'll talk about, when this region has been in the throes of unprecedented collaboration for the past decade, kind of cheapens that word. I don't think that we can make orders of magnitude leaps beyond the work that we've done, maybe in the outcomes and in service delivery, but in collaboration, I don't believe that's true. With regard to workforce, I believe that we can make unprecedented leaps. So I don't across the board find that word to be in tension, and I'm willing to let a little bit of that healthy tension rest as long as we tease it out in the issue by issue basis.
Good?
Could I add one thing?
Yes, yes.
So I'm starting to become allergic to the word unprecedented for reasons that have nothing to do with what's going on in here. So if we could find another word, I would be happier. Just saying.
All right. Sounds like some massaging. Okay, the next one here, public trust, community involvement, needs. Who wants to speak to this one?
I will, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Hello, everyone again. Mohammed Saifuddin. So the proposed actions are intentional and deliberate in highlighting those words that I've just added, which is good. But I think if that's the mission, it needs to be highlighted, just seeing how the perception of how this new partner who's coming to the area has been rolled out. So I think having that in the statement would be beneficial, not to the bodies only, but to the community as well, to also let them know that we're mindful
Okay.
of what has transpired.
So
in the
just
past.
so that I'm clear then, so you would be, like Commissioner Crystal, would be wanting to amend this. And this would be among the things you would want to see added here, or we're talking about something
No,
different?
that is correct,
Okay.
to add it to the statement, but I think
Okay.
the chairs did a pretty good job in highlighting that in each proposal that they have here and some of the topics we're talking about, and I'm thankful for that.
Okay, great.
That is a statement, I do.
Anybody wants to comment further? No, let's keep moving. Collaboration with private sector. Who would like to take this one on?
Well, that was mine. I had to think of something to write down. So, it's the only and it was again because I was drawn to the unprecedented collaboration between our two jurisdictions, so the only thing that I could find, it is an excellent statement, actually. The only thing that struck me that was kind of it's absolutely implicit, but it's not explicit that this effort is obviously going to involve collaboration with the private sector. So.
Okay, all right.
I agree with the joint memo.
Oh, there we go.
I had to say something too, Eric. Bell pepper, I smell bell pepper. Anyway, I agree with that memo, the way it's written, including unprecedented. Don't want her to have an allergy attack over there. But well, we'll leave it at that. Anyway, when I read this before I came here, I thought, boy, that hits the nail on the head. And I was really very pleased with the 5 different areas that we might want to focus on. In any event, the one thing that I think is so important is something that Justin said, and that was the fact that if we just leave things and to chance, sort of whatever comes along, and we do the best with whatever opportunities we have, we're not going to get anywhere near the kind of amount of affordable housing or any of these things. You see, I'm really plugging for affordable housing. But anyway, the 2 voices of the 2 jurisdictions are much stronger than if just one jurisdiction is out there fighting for these 5 things. So it'll be louder and stronger, and I go for it.
Louder and stronger. Okay, I'm going to take this. That's okay. Metrics measure progress.
So I think it's a pretty nice, go in the memo and everything. My thing is we could make all the nice statements that we want, but if we're not actually measuring them, and I understand that within individual projects we always have metrics, but I think when we're talking about being implicit and explicit, it's important to show that, there's some level of accountability. Because otherwise we're saying this, and how are we holding ourselves as bodies accountable? So I'd like to see something around accountability and metrics placed into it. If possible, maybe a second sentence, I don't know, follow-up paragraph.
Another principle?
Okay, so it's a lot more discussion on this one, because, and part of it is sort of how does that get actualized, right? And I think some of this is going to come out as you start talking about the policy areas as well, because at the end of the day, how are you going to know you're successful? Like, what does that look like if we are not precise about what 10 years from now or 5 years from now we have said, where we want to go? Okay. And ensures community engagement.
That would be mine. So I think it was a very good statement as written, as others have echoed, and I agree with all of the comments and insertions that have been proposed thus far. I think, as others have mentioned, I was looking at it and trying to find something to add, and I think it's, as someone mentioned, sort of implicit but not explicit, that it's not just the 12 of us or 14 of us at the table.
Okay, and when you talk about community engagement, is it around the work of this body, or is it beyond? Can you just talk a little bit more?
Sure. I think it's around the issues sort of we're discussing, and I think we're still sort of figuring out what the work of this body is. So.
Okay. Because this is one of those ones, right, where when we talk about the governance structure, when we talk about that, you know, the how, this one is going to take on a lot more resonance, right? Okay. We're going to put this right here. And then we got, and those most in need. Add this language. So this is another tweak to this one. Who wants to elaborate on this one?
So I added that. I think all of us know that diverse communities and those most in need don't mean the same thing. And so I just think that it's, and I'm mindful that with respect to housing, for example, serving those at the 30 to 60% of area median income is really important. But the work that's been done on homelessness, those who are most in need is just adds that little focus and clarity, I think, that might be worth it. I don't think it's that far away from the challenges piece that you mentioned, John, but that's the sort of thought that's behind that added language.
So this would be, you're suggesting this is a tweak to this existing language. Okay, let's see. As we work together to become a global magnet for talent and innovation, we ensure that our investments ...
Yeah, and then it picks up in the paragraph, is inclusive and benefits the diverse communities in both of our jurisdictions for generations to come. And I'd like to add Matt's language about addressing the most vulnerable. And my point here, I guess, is a little bit what Eric was talking about, what's implicit and explicit. I think what we're about and why we were attracting, trying to attract Amazon, all this work to some is to make this region grow and be healthy economically. I think we're well on the path to being a global center for innovation and talent. I'm hoping that anybody in the world who wants to solve the world's problems, climate change, whatever the big ones are, will know if they come here, they can work with other great minds, and we can actually really make things happen, which is really exciting. I think that's where we're headed. I'm hoping it is. So I was going to be explicit about that. But absolutely, why we're here is to make sure as that happens, we don't leave people behind. And so that's why I added that one. And then while I've got the floor, I love the renewing our shared commitments and being, that Ms. Crystal put in, and using existing structures. In other words, rather than sitting down here to reinvent affordable housing and all these things, all of our jurisdictions are already doing that. So if we can leverage what we already have, that will be great. But when you first said shared commitments, I actually thought it was a little bit the commitments to the people who already live here. Because sometimes I find with Amazon coming, folks who are already here are worried that they're going to be left out. What is this? This community that I know that's been so comfortable and is just like changing, and I don't recognize it. So that we need to remember those folks as we're doing this as well.
So you just amended this one again?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, just checking. I mean, you got all that, right?
That's what happens when we listen to each other.
No, this is good. So I just want to be clear, though, on this one. Is this supersede in the beginning, or this is coming at the end? Where were you thinking this was going to show up? Or
where I had inserted, I just fit it right in this paragraph, which is the 1, 2, 3, 4, the last paragraph on that first page of the memo.
Oh, okay.
Remember I said ... and you fit it in there. So that was if we really want to get into, wordsmithing. And I think Ms. Jackson finally is ready to.
I would.
Yeah.
So the one thing that comes to mind, piggybacking off of just about everybody now, something I want to keep in there is the sense of urgency. And I really appreciate the mayor and the chair having that statement in there, because we don't want this to go on forever. We do want to be a magnet. We want it to happen. Well, we wanted it to happen, of course, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And of course, this is where we are. So what we don't want to do is become stagnant in our planning and our strategies. We actually want to move this forward in a way that is timely as events are happening, as we have the Innovation Campus coming, and proposing all these amazing things that they are going to bring up here from Virginia Tech, and then collaborate more with Amazon. So that sense of urgency is like the perfect statement, I think.
Okay. So, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Board Chair, do you wish to amend or tweak, or is there, given that you both initiated this?
I mean, Mayor Wilson and I haven't discussed it. I'm sure that we can find a way to recraft words that speak to a lot of what we've heard tonight. I don't think any of it is wholly inconsistent with any of the things that we were envisioning, so I think this is largely helpful. I will, and I promise this is the last time, I'll take the floor. I shouldn't promise that because I probably won't be able to uphold it. But, you know, I think some of what informed Mayor Wilson and I talking about this is looking at this opportunity, and whether the word is unprecedented or something else, is being wholly unique. And it's borne by an amount of pessimism and optimism at the same time. The pessimism comes in with business as usual in this country, particularly when it comes to economic growth and investment, typically leaves people behind. And the people that it leaves behind are the people who are historically left behind and who are subject to marginalization over and over. I don't need to identify who those are, but that's the typical story. And business as usual usually leads to typical results. So it was an attempt to say that we really need to do something fundamentally different. And here's where the optimism comes in. Because this is a planned level of growth, because there are all kinds of partnerships that came together to make this happen that are going to be happening at the same time, we are in a unique opportunity to really shape our own destinies in ways that I think are consistent with the values that we have as jurisdictions. So I do want to make sure we capture that whole idea that while there's a lot that we should rely on in terms of past practice, we shouldn't send any signal that we're going to let sort of our past be our prologue, if you will. I want to make sure that we capture the whole idea that this is a dynamic opportunity for good and bad, and we want to respond accordingly. I don't think that's inconsistent with anything that we heard, but just wanted to make sure I underscored that.
Yeah, you know, I would agree with Christian. I think first of all, the comments were great. These were really, this is the kind of conversation I was hoping we would have about this. But I do, you know, I think Ms. Crystal's comments are absolutely on target, that where we have structures that we can leverage, where we have past practices that we can build on, I think we absolutely should do so, because we don't need to create everything new. That all being said, I think the use of the word unprecedented was intentional in that I think, you know, we're not going to get together, we're not going to celebrate collaboration and then do exactly the same things we've been doing for all along. And I think if we want to chart a very different course than other communities that have seen kind of rapid economic investment like this, we're going to have to do it a little differently. And I think that was the goal here. The goal was to be a little disruptive and try some things that are maybe non-traditional. And so I think Katie's exactly right, that, you know, we obviously pay tribute to what we've done, obviously build on structures that exist today, but, you know, the result, I will be very underwhelmed if at the end of this we have just, you know, done some of the same things we've done in the past better. Like, I'm hoping we have a long list of things that we really never thought of or really never conceived of that we end up coming out of this effort, so.
Did you want to?
Well, I guess for my part, the accountability, the thought of a second sentence is more attractive than 9 more adjectives in the first, because I think what you've done here is really good, but, you know, the concept of accountability and metrics are a little different, and perhaps just looking at some of these, you can capture some of the others, and I would not want to group draft this. You guys did a great job, and I'd be fine, but I wouldn't, that's just my 2 cents that, you know, 9 different subordinate clauses is not as powerful as accountability and capturing those concepts in a second sentence for me.
Yeah, and let me just say, I mean, first of all, I'm very proud. We have 12 elected officials in the room. We haven't gotten to punctuation yet, so that's good. Why did you have to put that out there? That's really good. I'm proud of us. I'm proud of us. But I will say this, and, you know, I see we have the chair of COG, Chuck Bean, here, and, you know, we just, I think the accountability, and I'm glad Kanik brought it up, I think the accountability piece of this is really implicit, because, we just made a regional commitment around housing, and by nature, just like the regional commitment around housing, the commitments we're going to make here are largely voluntary in nature, and we have to police ourselves. I think the good news is only two of us, we can police ourselves a little easier, and plus we're close, so we know where each other lives. But I think that's really the key. I think holding ourselves accountable for what we lay out here is going to be absolutely critical. So.
Okay. Oh, yes.
This actually, I hope, will be a good transitional thought into the next body of work. Justin, that's exactly what I meant when I was referencing shared existing commitments. Yep. It's not to say that we ought to keep doing what we've been doing and expect different results. It's to recognize that in order to attract Amazon, we engaged in some pretty unprecedented level of commitments. We haven't sat on our hands over the last 12 months, right? In order to address some of these commitments we've made, some of these challenges, right, that we're concerned about, we've made unprecedented commitments as a region. And so I appreciate your reference to the Council of Government. Yep. The Metro funding agreement is the other major milestone I'm thinking of.
We also got the Metro chair here, too.
Exactly. So we're delighted to have that, to have him represented. So my point is, I hope I did not leave the impression that I'm seeking for us to continue our existing structures, our existing work. I think that we would err if we said we are going to come up with something unprecedented in terms of population or housing unit production goals, right? When COG has just done this. Yes. Or we're going to create new regional funding agreements on transportation when the region has just done this. So I would like us, as we move into this next phase, to think about where are there places we can put our shoulder to existing wheels, and where do we truly need to reinvent them?
Yeah, that's right.
And that's a perfect transition point. And I do want to reiterate, because Matt here said this, and I want this to be clear. We're not trying to redraft this tonight, but we've gotten enough inputs that we have a roadmap for how this statement will be refined. And I should also clarify that one of the outcomes of this is that we will be summarizing what's come out of this discussion, and we will be providing it with the marks. And it will get to everybody in the normal ways in which materials get to you. So you'll see that this will come back. We're going to shift gears. I'm keeping an eye on the clock. The next piece of what we want to talk about is, again, we're not starting from scratch, policy. Tonight we need to agree on, are these the ones we should care the most about or not, and what is missing? So the first one of this exercise is just to talk through each of these, right? So that everybody has a shared understanding about what is meant. And then we would like to see, does this list grow? And then the last exercise is we're going to force you to prioritize. Because at the end of the day, if we have a long list of things, we can't do all of them equally well, or they're not equally important. And so one of the exercises, and you have some dots on your 1, 2, 3s on your table, it's really to get you to zero in on what's most important, all right? So let's start. If nobody objects, let's just go in this order, right? So the initial conversation is around what are the key policy areas that this body should focus on. And this naturally lends itself into, there is an action plan that gets developed. This is the future work, right, of the joint work group to decide on what you're going to do. And I'm very comforted by the idea you're not starting from scratch. It's not like there is not an existing affordable housing strategy that individual jurisdictions have. So this question about what are you building upon versus, you so eloquently said, lean in on trying to move something that already exists. But let's talk about housing affordability. So what does this mean to you? That's the question. When we talk about housing affordability, what does that mean to you? And is this something that should stay on the list? Or maybe I should say, does anybody disagree? Does anybody think this should not be on the list?
So let me talk to this in kind of in the spirit of Ms. Crystal's comments earlier. You know, we're both doing affordability, right? We're investing money in affordability. We're trying land use tools. We're doing a lot of the things that you do to address affordability. The reason this is compelling to me from a collaboration perspective is looking at how we can do some of these things together in a way that might be way more effective than just what we're doing on our own. And I think both of those areas, how we invest money, potentially doing things, pooling our money and looking at projects differently, kind of ignoring borders when we talk about how do we maximize housing creation. And then on the land use tool side, I feel like there's some real interesting opportunities here. Whether we're looking at, a regime that crosses borders and looking at transfer of density rights and things like that. What are the types of things that together we can do where on our own, we're nowhere near as effective. And so I'm obviously excited about all these areas, but I'm really excited about this area because I feel like there's some real opportunities out there for us.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to taint the conversation, but I just wanted to give you a sense of what I was thinking on this one. So.
Dale, you wanted to say something? No? You just got excited.
No, it's stronger, louder, and more effective when you pair up. If you all can stand here in an anecdotal account, when even before we knew for sure that this area was that we were going to be getting the Amazon folks coming, I was hearing from people that lived even in Bellevue and all around, really wondering if they should get a jump on all of this and get out of here because there wasn't going to be affordable housing. This was obviously something, and I remember one person saying that they couldn't even sleep at night, that this was really pressing hard on them. So, and because we heard so much about that kind of thing, that's why I was glad to see that it was number one. We know that the commitment through Council of Governments is going to be very helpful too. But I think that this should be one of our top, for sure. But I want to address one other thing if I can.
Okay.
I was very pleased that we were talking about the workforce development because that's where you hit the people who maybe just haven't the preparation. And here there should be a lot of jobs that are available, and we need to get our workforce trained and ready to go. And I sure hope somebody from Mr. Manager, I sure hope somebody from the Workforce Development Group is here. I didn't happen to run across anybody, but that's really important. Let's get those jobs going, and you'll find that people who feel left behind will have a spot to go to, and you won't have quite perhaps the resentment, because there is some pushback on it.
Okay. And I want to come back to housing affordability for a second, because I think it would be important just to acknowledge this, that the pressures on affordability, right, predate Amazon coming to town, right? And so I think the work then is around, one, the reality of this region, right? And then you have this added pressure now, right? So it's the need for solving this issue has been on the table for quite some time. And I think there's a point that Justin talked about, which is around trying to figure out these different tools, because each jurisdiction already has some strategy around housing affordability, right? So above and beyond that, what are we talking about? Again, we're not trying to solve it tonight. We're just trying to get consensus around, is this on the list, or we need to
I don't
change.
think anybody's going to say it's not on the list.
Okay.
I mean, I think this is pretty towards the top of almost everybody's list. Part of, it's not just zoning. I like to think about it around housing opportunities. And a lot of the stuff that's below it is also interconnected, right? Because when we think about housing opportunity, when we think about developments, what else can we co-locate there? Mm-hmm. Can we put a satellite workforce development site there? Can we put a satellite, haven't done this yet, cultural affairs or diversity affairs, throwing it out there again. Space for early childhood education, having classrooms in a new development that goes up. I think we did that. Did we do that at St. James? I want to say we did do that at St. James, right? So taking those models and creating those spaces where there are supports in place for everyone, regardless of what your income level is. And then, of course, we always have to look at the transportation infrastructure because, we all know anything that's going to go up, we're going to have to do density. There's not really, any other way we could do it. And if we're going to be adding density, we have to make sure that we're putting the proper infrastructure in place around it. So I don't know what else to add there, but.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I want us to kind of think as we talk about housing affordability is the issue around home ownership, and if it's not even home ownership, kind of the ownership of that space. It's not just people in a unit. We're going to throw out unit numbers and look at a density as we build, but making sure the residents feel that they're not just people to be moved into a place and moved out of a place when prices go up. Giving folks real opportunity to really connect, own, and push the future of who they are, where they are. I think that's what I really want us to focus on as we get into the weeds of home ownership. What does that look like? Housing affordability. What does that look like? And so it's not just, hey, we're going to redevelop this area and throw up this many units and hopefully people are there. But people feel that they still have a connection to Alexandria or Arlington because they still have a piece of it. And it's not just owned by some developer. And so I think that's the new wave that we need to look at as it relates to housing affordability. Because I think, as we probably already we hear kind of the resentment and negative effects of that because people don't necessarily feel that connected anymore.
Okay. Yes, Mohammed.
Thank you. When I was at one of the COG meetings, and Matt was with me on that one, something really interesting kind of came to during the discussion. I don't know if it was Carl from our department or not, P&Z, but in discussing affordable housing and the challenges that come with it regionally, one of the hindrances that they brought up was political will. So I know everyone in here cares about this issue and supports it greatly, but I would like for the group to kind of define what housing affordability is. There's a general understanding of what it is, but as I sat on council, it seems like each of us may have a different philosophy or view of how that works. So if we're going to work on it between the two jurisdictions, I think there should be a set definition, and then also look into what that political will hindrance is, since everyone is committed to it, yet the problem persists. So I'd like to explore that more, or maybe the people from COG can give us more information on what they meant by political will.
Right.
Because we're all willing.
Right, and in the interest of time, tonight, we can't do that, right? But the work of this, when this conversation goes a little bit more deeply, you're right. And that will be true for all of this, because making sure that there's shared agreement of what is it we're talking about. When we use the words, do we mean the same things? Because we find all the time that people will use the same words and they mean something different to them. And so this is why we started off with the principles, right? Getting to a shared understanding about what it is we're about. And that will be true in each of these subgroups. All right, but thank you for bringing that up. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we're probably going to have to keep it limited sort of to housing, but I find if you talk to people, they talk about how expensive it is to live here. It's living affordability. So folks that are having trouble with housing, generally there are other two real big the things that take up most of their money is transportation, which we can deal with, and childcare, which isn't here at all. And I think, as we work this through and we're trying to serve all of these folks, we want to look at affordable living. It's not just about where you sleep at night. It's about everything else that goes on in your life and having a positive life while you're here.
So let me just ask you, are you suggesting we add to this list? I heard you talk about affordable childcare. So I want to be as precise as we can about with that. This
Mr. Chapman says yes.
So that's a yes. So this is an add.
Second, yeah.
Well, I think the idea of expanding
But can I ask a
expanding it.
question? Yeah, so my only question for us with this, not that I disagree at all, I agree wholeheartedly, but, one of the things that I think is important for us is to think of areas where cross-jurisdictional collaboration can do things that we cannot do ourselves. And I'm not saying that the answer is that isn't possible with childcare, it's just not immediately intuitive to me. So I would encourage us to think about that. Like, we all value that, we all think it's incredibly important, but I would not want us to spend time just putting in
Right.
all of the policy areas that we care about and minimizing our ability to focus on the key opportunities with the
But I
others.
will throw in,
And
I think most of
remember,
our
we're
childcare workers live in Alexandria, I think we found out.
And remember, when we started this session, I said, we're going to force you to prioritize, right? So the idea is just to make sure all the voices get reflected on this list, and then we get to consensus about what bubbles to the top in terms of where the most energy is going to be spent. And it's not that if something is at the bottom of the list, you don't work on it. The question is there may be a different strategy around what you
And I
move
think I
forward
didn't mean affordable child, I meant affordable living, I really did.
Affordable
I think
living.
healthcare, a diet, everything falls into that sort of stuff. We want everybody to be able to live well here.
That relates to this too, right? Because if you have housing you can afford, if you have a job that pays you well, if you have quality education, you have access to transportation, this weaves through all of that, right? And we need to talk about the small women SWAM, small women business assistance effort, which is on the list as well. Yes, ma'am.
So what Ms. Garvey was saying was something I was thinking about as well. I hope, just to take a step back from all the policy areas, what I do hope is that we are looking at other jurisdictions that have already been at these crossroads, like San Francisco, Palo Alto, Menlo Park, that have had these huge corporations come in that have scared people, as Ms. Pepper was saying, that then find themselves with a lack of affordable housing and a lack of affordable living because everybody in those areas, for the majority of them, they rent. They don't own anything anymore. So we really have to look at how we're going to, from the history of other places, bring that to the table as well to see what has worked and what has not worked in other jurisdictions around the country, and then hopefully get some great ideas and put them forth here.
One of the future meetings can look at what are other cities doing, lessons learned from other jurisdictions, as well as models that have been explored for the future. Yes, Eric.
So actually, what you just said, Ms. Jackson, actually dovetails into what I've been trying to formulate in my mind, what's the best way to say this. And it's actually, I think that there's a wrapper for this, the way that I see it, and I don't know if this is just an observation or if there is something to work with here, but really the wrapper of all of these things that are in the key policy areas, and it gets to what you were talking about, Ms. Garvey, with, you call it affordable living. I think it's wealth creation, that it's not just about that people can afford to live here, but just get by. It's that people can have a quality of life and they are building wealth. And yes, John, that was exactly, I think, where you were headed with what you were talking about, that it's when you talk about the ownership versus the rental, there's places and times when rental is fine, you're in that place of your life or whatever, but there's also, we want to make sure that there's opportunities for wealth creation. And they are all interconnected, because what is your pathway for your family towards building wealth? It's all about, you have to have a place to live. Ideally, you have, for most of us, that's our largest investment, so that is something that builds wealth. But you gotta have good jobs, and so you have to have the workforce development and educate yourself. You want your kids to get a great education. We all know that transportation and childcare and those other costs are all part of what goes to your total affordability, and that's where you were going, right, Libby? And then with the small women and minority-owned businesses, I think that also gets, obviously that's at the heart of wealth creation as well. So I don't know, again, whether or not that is
These two feel like they're related.
additive or duplicative, but.
Okay. And on the wealth creation issue, right, because you've got lots of wealth in this area right now, is there a distinction that you're making? And I think one of the principals' statement had a distinction about not just diverse communities, but also folks who are most in need. I'm paraphrasing here, where's my thing? So is there a distinction, when you're talking about wealth creation, is there an emphasis on any particular group or just broadly? There you go.
Equality of opportunity.
That's what I was pushing for, but I didn't want to say that. Okay. So, and I'm keeping an eye on the clock, so we got to get you out on time. All right.
One final comment.
Yes.
for one thing. I just wanted to add maybe some granularity to something I'd love to see fall into this bucket. What keeps me up at night is not whether we can add enough committed affordable, I'm not going to say units, if we can add enough homes that are affordable to people making 30 to 60% of our median income. I think that with the right resources, we have the policy infrastructure that will allow us to do it. What keeps me up at night is what happens in the next 18 months, what's happened over the last 12 months. I believe that we can deliver enough affordable homes with affordable rents in the next 10 or 15 years. People are being priced out urgently, and we really lack any policy tools because of our state condition to prevent that, to prevent the speculation and the gouging, to prevent the sort of instability we've seen in our real estate market with price listings skyrocketing.
Right.
And I think, Ms. Pepper, the way you characterized it about people's worries, that's keeping them up at night. Telling them that we have a long-term plan is not going to do it. And to Mr. Chapman's excellent point, people are feeling like they're, or are, in danger of being placed out of the communities they live. If we can offer them a place to come back to after we've approved the funding and it's built in 5 years, they're gone, right? And their legacy and everything they've contributed to the community and their family's history has gone with it. So I would love to see us figure out, because this is an area I don't think anybody's thinking about, how do we help our folks across jurisdictions in this incredibly urgent period? What are the temporary measures we can provide? Are there information sharing ways that we can help people stay close to the communities that they love in Arlington or Alexandria, while some of these policy efforts take time to ramp up? I'd love, going back to that beautiful phrase about the urgency of ensuring equitable growth in our mission statement, I'd love to see that be a key priority in our housing affordability work.
So what I'm hearing, and it gets back to the comment I made about this pressure on affordability didn't just start with Amazon, right? So this idea about what can you do now, because there are families who are struggling right now and may leave this jurisdiction because they can't afford to live here or they can't afford housing, right? So woven through all of this, what I'm taking away from your comment is this need to focus on things that can happen now, not 5 years from now or 10 years.
Yeah, specifically in the bucket of housing affordability. If some of our transportation or workforce development efforts take a little longer to come to fruition, I think that's okay, but housing affordability in particular.
Okay. So I want to talk about small women and minority businesses, this policy area.
Maybe we could call it women and minority-owned small businesses. As a small woman, I'm just not,
Women who are over 5'4" are still eligible for assistance.
We can call it anything you want.
Well, it's small, comma, women and minority-owned businesses. You don't have to be a small woman, and you don't have to be a woman either.
All right, we'll come up with the right acronym, but
there were too many
the emphasis here is on businesses who are a little.
So trying to move us forward. So
As quickly as you can.
Okay, Matt, you got the floor.
I guess I feel like the history, as I know it, is so is a struggle there, and my impression with the region, having grown up here, but that it seems like this is in the new and different type of work that we should be doing, and also, a slightly broader sort of boundary could enable us to really focus work in this area, in this last category. So it seems very logical to me. We didn't touch too much on the workforce and the public education. I'm totally for those. I'd love to be educated on what we would do. Transportation and Housing Affordability Index is a thing, a policy tool. But I'd love to learn what in transportation we're doing different here, because I think you guys who work in the TSB and other transportation bodies, I think we do a lot to individually and together there. I'm not sure whether, like hunger, we would love, Elizabeth, we would love to have hunger in here, but I don't think it's quite appropriate, even though it's equity related. And even though there are some regional things that could be done with hunger, I guess I'm just asking if someone can make clear why transportation should fit here. Not that I'm against transportation, just that why is it new and different in this space?
Sounds like you're against transportation. I mean, as a response, and this is not, you know, I hesitate to speak with any specificity because we don't know yet, but between the millions of square feet that are going to be developed in Pentagon City, Crystal City, and then Potomac Yard, while we have a Metro bus product that serves those areas, we don't know if it's going to necessarily serve the areas where people who are going to live, who would shop, and who would work at all of the different places in which this is all going to be created. So as we think about affordable living, as we think about the efficacy of the entire transit network, there is the possibility that something beyond the fixed routes that we have put in place to serve today's needs will be required. So I don't think there is at least as firm an idea in my mind as to what it would be, but just recognizing that it will probably be something, because we're talking about essentially new small cities being created within a very short area.
And if I may?
Right.
Yeah.
And just to
Yes,
tag on
and then
to
you're
the
next.
last piece that you were talking about, you know, these small cities are being created, but these small cities are still within a much larger region, especially a larger region where, unfortunately, however people see it, DC is still the big magnet that pulls a lot of people in towards itself for jobs and for activity. And so as people come from outside of our area to go into DC, we still have to understand that's going to have a major effect on the folks within our small cities that we're creating. And so talking about that, I think, is one of the things that I'd love to hear more about with our joint work together. How do we make sure that we, our folks are able to take full advantage of the investments we've made within our areas, and we make investments to make sure folks coming outside or coming through aren't impacting us too negatively. And not that they're the enemy or anything like that. I think we have to be very mindful that as we look at other parts of Virginia, they're still continuing to grow. DC itself is still continuing to grow, and so you're still going to have a relationship where some of these outer jurisdictions are still coming and pushing through our area to come into DC. And so how does that affect our transportation network? How does that affect the investments that we've made? How does that affect things like Metro system as it continues to grow? How are our users being affected by that?
Okay.
Yes. As we move to the priorities, what I've kind of realized I'd like to just throw out as a thought is it seems to me when it comes to urgency, housing, affordability, and actually the small business assistance, those are the two groups that are getting pushed out now, and we probably should have done something yesterday. So to me, it feels like if I'm going to put a number, those are the two that are absolutely urgent. I don't know if they're more, the other are equally important, but we have a little more time leeway. So I don't know if we can add that to, as we're doing out the priority thing. But what we need to look at right now, as I say, we should have done it a while, is housing and the small business assistance, I think. That's
Okay.
my view.
Justin and then
So,
Kate.
two
Katie.
thoughts. So, I don't know if I'm on here. Okay. So I feel like the workforce development and the small women item are in a category of themselves, and the category that I think they are in is they are areas where, to the extent we're trying to make sure that our existing populations can, in a very short term, benefit from some of these investments, I feel like those two, there has to be some urgency, because we're talking about, from the workforce development side, equipping our residents to gain employment, to qualify for employment that's going to be made available by some of these investments. And then from the SWAM business assistance, we're equipping our residents and our businesses to benefit from some of the investment that's occurring. And so I feel like those two are in a special category, and I do feel like that there has to be some urgency on those, because those are very short term. To Katie's point earlier, those are very short term opportunities for us, where I think if we don't do it, we have a lot of residents that are left behind. Okay. Now, on the transportation side, I do want to tack on to what Christian said, because I think I agree, and I think Katie said this in a good way earlier, that that's probably one of the areas where we have the heaviest collaboration, and it's not just these two jurisdictions, it's regionally, and there's a lot of entities that are already set up. I would caveat that a little bit and say that we're doing a pretty radical rethinking of our local bus network right now, and I know Metro's doing something similar, and the fact, you could almost argue the fact that we're doing that on our own, there's nothing magical about the border when it comes to a dash bus route. In fact, I get on every day one of the few dash bus routes that actually crosses into Arlington every day and goes to the Pentagon. And so, shame on us. This might be an area where we should have been actually doing this more collaboratively already, not just at the metro level, but at some of the local bus, looking at our local bus route systems together, and kind of ignoring the fact that there's boundaries in play. And so I think that's, while there's certainly some already a lot of work being done on transportation, and it's probably not as urgent for this collaboration, I do think there's some opportunities there. So.
Okay. Katie, you patiently waited.
Yeah. Well, so notwithstanding, I think, a very good point about our local bus service, I just want us to really take a point, and a finer point on the fact that there is unprecedented, new, transformational, et cetera, work happening. And actually, our two jurisdictions, to our credit, if we can pat ourselves on the back a little bit, are at the table, are leading the table, right? The Commonwealth of Virginia is now being represented on the WMATA board by an Arlingtonian and a current Alexandrian, former member of this council, representing not necessarily our jurisdictions, but all of Northern Virginia. We are, I think if you had told me, to John's point about, or excuse me, Mr. Chapman's point about the impacts of cars coming from the outer jurisdictions into DC, if you told me a couple years ago that we were on the precipice of being able to offer a one-seat ride, bi-directional off-peak service from Fredericksburg into Union Station, I would have laughed at you. And now that is within our grasp. And so I think it's really important that we continue to acknowledge that work, continue to be at the table for that work. And I do worry a little bit that focusing too much on that as what's the difference? It's multilateral and bilateral, right? As a bilateral issue instead of multilateral could actually take our focus off the important regional work. I agree completely about the idea that our bus service should talk to each other, but not at the expense of our participating and shaping perhaps in a better direction the bus transformation project happening at WMATA. So what I would love to suggest is maybe kind of a strategic or operational way forward here. I wonder if the best way we could address transportation and mobility is not necessarily through new structures framework, but through a set of principles that Arlingtonian and Alexandrian representatives on these different boards that we expect from our staff and our managers will bring to these issues. What will we continue to advocate for to make sure we see equitable prosperity out of Amazon's arrival? What will be our principles that we can apply, not creating new bodies of work, but how we will be guided to bring these shared values to the places we are already represented and in some cases leading.
Right. And that's a really important point, because even though we're talking about these key policy areas, it's not always about new work, right? It might be working smarter, right? Or being a little bit more intentional around leveraging something that exists already. And so I do, because I'm looking at the clock, I'm going to keep it moving, is this idea, these conversations you've started now will then move into the future meetings around, well, what would look like? Because part of it is not only just to say we care about this as a policy, but what are we going to do? The what. It means nothing if all we do is just talk about it, right? Or we can all acknowledge that these are pain points, right? But what? What as a joint body are you committing yourself to doing to get to this accountability question so that you can measure, did we do what we said we were going to do 5 years from now? And Eric, you've been patient, and then I'm going to move us on.
Okay, thank you. I would actually like to just make one comment on the workforce development, and then I have one new item, which is, so on the workforce development, just to make sure, it's sort of in here, but to make sure it has the weight that I think it deserves, which is the fact that it is not just about the tech talent, that it is across the board workforce development. And we have the line in here, the goal is to create not only a more robust tech talent pipeline for professional positions region-wide, but for a diversity of employment opportunities. And I just want to underscore that the other, because a big part of our discussion about why we were supportive of the incentives to bring these 25,000 jobs was recognizing that that gets leveraged at least 2 to 1. I heard depending on who you ask, what numbers you got, but we know that there's many more jobs than just the 25,000. And so I think we really, when we go back to that wealth creation, the whole idea of how this fits into being able to thrive as a family in this area, it is also about the people who are going to prepare food in the region. It's about people who paint houses. It's about your plumbers and your electricians and your HVAC. All this housing that we're talking about building all needs to be built and serviced. And so I want to make sure that just double underscore that is should have the weight that I hope we all agree it deserves. And then real quick, I did want to also elevate, because it is in here about sustainability, or it's specifically mentioned climate resilience, but I actually would suggest that this is a potential key policy area, because even though we talk about that into each of these other areas that we will take into consideration, climate resilience, I think the fact that we share as our border is 4 Mile Run, and that has huge, I know flooding is obviously a big issue that Arlington is dealing with. I'm assuming it's also a pretty big issue, and actually,
dealing with it a lot.
I was going to say, you guys are absolutely, we are less concerned about sea level rise than you guys are, but regardless, we share a border, and therefore the solutions don't stop at the border either. And so when we talk about how are we going to face that, and when we talk about what is a fundamental threat to wealth creation, in particular for those among us that are most vulnerable, there's tons of data out there how that those who are likely to suffer the worst consequences are exactly the group that we are here to talk about tonight. I really think we ought to consider seriously elevating the idea of sustainability, in particular climate resilience, to a higher order of key policy area. Thank you.
I'm adding it. Okay. Nobody's talked about pre-K to 12 education. Can we touch on that, please?
We all respect our school board colleagues and don't want to.
I mean, that undergirds everything that we're doing here in many ways, and I think it's absolutely crucial. I think both of our school systems do pretty well. I think they're actually starting to cooperate a fair amount, and I think this group can encourage that. I think maybe we need maybe that more than some of these others, it's leveraging what we already have, and as Ms. Crystal said, we've got our colleagues on the school board, but I mean, that's absolutely crucial. That's part of the reason this region is what it is because of the good schools we've got.
Okay.
And that actually hits the equity because the schools need to be good for everyone, and we're pretty darn close to that.
Emphasis on good for everyone. Okay, we've got 25 minutes left. So this is your list. And I know orally you've talked about what's important to you, but we're going to ask you now to officially prioritize. So we're going to start one at a time. You have 3 dots. Red is the one you are you think is the highest priority. Green is the one that you think is the next high priority. And yellow is the third. You only get 3 dots. So we're forcing you to prioritize. Okay? Huh? No, it's the one with the numbers on them. You have no numbers on them here. Let's give you this one.
You were supposed to
You only need to use 3. Red, green, and yellow. So who wants to go first?
Me, I'm up.
There we go. And you have 2. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just go, everybody go. It's
almost like we collaborated on this.
I can't figure out number 3. That's my problem.
Cover up those cameras. Cover up the cameras.
Steve was like, do not let Justin annex our country.
Oh, remember, you get to do on this board too. Don't forget what's on this board in case. No. This is part of that list. You just expanded the list. Okay, all right.
I'm going to tell her you wanted her.
You're good?
2 hours.
2 hours. Schedule it on time.
Okay, we're almost done. Did we have everybody? Oh. No. All right. So I think that there is a clear consensus on what folks think is the number one priority here, right? Affordable housing. So you've just won the prize of gonna go figure out now, as a joint body, what are we gonna do about it, right? Because like I said, each of you are already doing something, right? The question is, as Dell would say, louder, bigger, bolder, or something like that, right? So what is that, right? Is it about new policy tools? Is it about how you use public land? Is it about changing in zoning? What is it that you're going to do? And part of the challenge here is preservation of what is here, because there is a report that came out a couple years ago about the loss of market affordable housing, right? And so what are you going to do? So, all right, clear consensus. So I guess workforce development is the next one? Wait.
The SWAMs.
SWAMs.
Small women.
So, same deal here. What specifically, as a body, you're going to commit to do about this, right? And part of the issue also has become the pipeline strategy, right? Because this is paced over time, some of the new opportunities, right? So what will this look like, right? And underlying this, I presume, is an assumption around local too, right? Because you've got swarms all over the place, right? But is there a need to prioritize local to the jurisdiction? So, all right. And then workforce development. No, this was a smiley face he put up there. He just wanted
Stuff in the
I
ballot
was
box
like,
over
yeah.
there.
If you notice, these are all blue. All right? But I do think, though, that these themes here weave through all of these, right? You can't really talk about any of these without also talk about, sort of equitable wealth creation, right? You can't really talk about affordable living without also talking through. So I feel like by default, you're going to get some of these through here. All right? Transportation only got two stores. What's up with that?
But two number ones, though.
They're two number twos.
Oh, number two, sorry. Yeah.
Two number twos.
Was that the two TPB members? Right.
I think it's very important to note, per the earlier conversation, these are not priorities for us as elected officials. These are areas where we think Arlington and Alexandria working together can break new ground.
Correct. And now you've got the ability to do something about it, right? And to do differently as opposed to just the same thing that you've been doing individually. All right? Is there, and so sustainability did get 1 vote, over here 3, and climate resiliency, right? But that could also get woven into some of these comments when we're talking about housing, for example, when we're talking about transportation, right? So this is one of the things we will push you to think about are there ways, because these really are interrelated, right? It's, especially the first 4, right? All interrelated.
And Ray, if I may, given that Mr. Gutschall spoke most passionately about the sustainability and climate resilience, it was our intent that that be cross-cutting across everything that we do. So I think that might have influenced the allocation of the dots, since people had other places to do it.
All right.
And if you look at the placement in the memo, it was definitely the one that was on the on-deck circle. So it was the one we were debating, so.
All right, so we have about 15 minutes left to get you out of here. So let's talk about what happens next. Where do you go next? And then I'm going to hand it over to our 2 leads here to close us out. So like I said, we will be summarizing this. We will help to wordsmith the final statement of principles. That will be in writing, and that will be provided back to staff, and then they will share that with you to see, does this reflect what you as a body can adopt, right? So that's the next step. The other piece of this is then deciding on how you're going to work together going forward, right? As a joint body, what does that look like? Is it just you? Is it you plus other people, right? What are we talking about? And then once that's agreed upon, then sort of the timeline for then getting to the deep dive on all of this, all right? Given the urgency on some of these, right, that it's a now thing, right? So, but we're not committing to a timeline tonight. This is going to be followed up in writing. And then I wanted to see if our 2 leads here have other things they would like to add to this conversation, so we can get you. Oh, and I was just reminded here that some of the future work will be to agree upon definitions, right, for the subgroups here, the policy areas, so everybody is meaning what they say and say what they mean, and then also looking at what other cities are doing, whether it's around models or lessons learned from other areas that have had a huge influx of business opportunity and how they've dealt with it, so you don't fall into the same landmine if you can avoid it. All right? Am I missing anything? Is there anything that you've just been, on your mind, you just have to get out that just hasn't been said yet?
Were we going to talk at all about principles for the development of structures, or are our leads going to follow up on that?
Can we, yeah.
Get a couple little conversations.
We have time, we're early.
That's what I was hoping, yeah, let's do that. You want to?
But if we could just throw out things in bullet points, more than paragraphs, that would be great.
I'll be brief. A couple thoughts that I have in terms of principles that I don't, as was teed up first, I don't have a strong opinion about what the format should be. But a couple of principles that would be important to me in any framework or tool would be, exactly as the Vice Mayor said, community engagement. I think that's really important. So whatever structure we should have community engagement as a piece of it. And I also feel strongly that any authorities should really follow from a clear mission. If we're going to delegate or empower any authority to act on behalf of both of our jurisdictions, it should be really clear why they need that authority. I think otherwise we run the risk of creating a hammer that goes in search of nails.
Anybody wants to add to that?
On the community engagement point, I think that's one of the things that, when we talk about definitions and metrics, is something that we really have to look at. I think that both bodies do a good job of trying to do as much community engagement as possible. I think at times both bodies are also lacking, and being able to reach out to certain communities. So I think we really need to push ourselves, try and find some other practices, because we can't just keep on doing the same thing, because it clearly hasn't been working to the best of possibilities. So I just want to throw that out there to really push us when it comes to community engagement and really trying to bring out other parts of our communities that don't always come out, or at least find a way to be able to engage them and get their input.
Ray, if I could, and maybe if Councilor Aguirre and Board Member Crystal would like to opine, I would love to hear it. Community engagement, absolutely. I think one of the things that I, at least in my mind, aspired that this partnership could generate was more community empowerment. So bringing people not just to deliver feedback or to say things, but to really be a part of shaping their own destiny, whether it's through governance or through other means. Is that a principle that you all would like to see with this?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I actually am maybe a little more enthused about a CDC, for example, or the idea of an inclusive growth joint task force for exactly that reason.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So, go ahead.
Anna, please.
My time advocating for housing has not led me to, I don't have the experience that the city has with the housing authority. I guess I'm most attracted to the joint growth joint task force, and then I know some of the history of CDCs. I think those two have more attraction initially to me as organic and interactive than what I know of the housing authorities that I've advocated with. No disrespect, that's important, but I just feel like we want flexible, we want engagement, and the role of housing separately, it seems from the memo that there's a number of steps that would be necessary to create a joint housing authority, which is a little less immediately attractive than the other two items that are identified.
So what I heard you talk about was a lot of flexibility in being able to come up with a custom to suit kind of, okay, all right.
If I may piggyback.
Okay, and then
I'm
roll.
sorry. No, you
It's okay, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. It's all right, you got it. All right, thank you. So I think, I agree with Matt to a degree, but I think regardless of which direction we decide to go as far as these entities, we have to be mindful, and I hope this may not, hopefully it's not too uncomfortable, but we have to be mindful of the history of our jurisdictions and the legacy of it, and how till this day, regardless of who we end up choosing, these groups are going to be made up of people who are experts in their respective fields, but I think that's going to be lacking in diversity. So we have to be mindful of that. We'll make sure that as we move forward, that whichever group we end up going with has to be inclusive in a true sense and beyond 50% if we are going to address this issue properly, because there will be different perspectives, different mindsets just from either living that experience or going through it. So we have to be mindful of that in picking the individuals who will be in charge of these groups, because we may end up missing something in the long run, and therefore we'll be maintaining the status quo, although the intention is there, but having that different perspective, I think, will be beneficial to all. So it starts with the people who make up these groups, then we can actually talk about that.
Yep.
I don't know if it's a structure, but I'm thinking more and more about what Ms. Jackson said. So if we really want to do things differently, because we want a different result, then I think we do need to be looking far and wide for ideas, and outside of this country. We need to be looking around the world on who's doing the best solving these, because, you know, every now and then you read about incredible the education of Finland and how they do it completely differently, and it works really well. And then the Dutch are known for their resiliency, all this kind of. So I think we need, because I think, as you're right, I mean, you prompted me, Mohammed, because you're talking about how they're the usual people, and they're experts, and they're great. But if we want to go the next step, I think we just need to make sure in whichever area we're looking, we make sure we look at way beyond the borders.
Eric?
I wanted to suggest that we need to, there is the urgency, the sense of urgency, so we want the now solution, but there is also the opportunity here to correct something that I think has from my observation, has been a long time coming, which is that we are always bound by the solutions that are afforded to us by the General Assembly. And so we're oftentimes backwards. We are driving our solutions based on the tools, the limited tools that we have. So rather than a hammer in search of nails, we actually have a box of screws, and all we have is a hammer. And we can't find a screwdriver to save our lives. Well, and so what I would say to any of those that can hear my voice is coming up on November 5th is an opportunity to have a voice in what do we want a structure that serves our needs, and can we devise solutions and then the structures to implement those solutions as opposed to the other way around. So I think we ought to think big.
Okay. Yes, sir.
To add, hopefully to add to the conversation, I think one of the things as an idea that can be thrown out if it doesn't sound good, kind of joining on to what you were saying, Eric, because we do have this hurdle that is the General Assembly, maybe this partnership leverages a new opportunity to talk to not only the General Assembly, but also pull in some of the other Northern Virginia jurisdictions to talk about the resources that are needed, the new policy ways, and this might be just a dream of ours, but coming down to Richmond with a new focus, not just as separate jurisdictions that all want to do a thing, but a region that's trying to really do something different. This partnership is the start of that. And talking to General Assembly members with that focus, I don't know if that changes hearts and minds, but maybe it's a new way of operating. Maybe there's something more there that can be kind of explored as we move along.
Matt?
So I'm definitely interested in that. I know we're talking about framework and next steps. I do think, to your earlier comments, John and Katie, and to the post article on Arlandria that was 6 months ago, the phrase displacement prevention, I at least want to say that phrase because if you think about the flooding, this is sort of a questioning and a worrying and an anxiety that's deep regarding change. And we may not be able to do displacement prevention in all cases. It's certainly a better phrase than displacement mitigation, which doesn't sound right. But I think we do need to think about this next 18 months and the folks that are really in need. And that might not be a framework question. It might be another policy area. But I don't think, since we'll close soon, I don't think we can leave this conversation without at least considering that phrase because of the communities you mentioned, et cetera.
I'd actually like to thank Matt for bringing up Arlandria. It has been in multiple articles, not just in the Post, but it has been in Bloomberg and several other articles. NBC's done a couple pieces as well. And personally, this is when I first got to Alexandria and to Virginia. This is where a lot of the work that I was doing in the school system happened to be, and have continued to be working within that community. And I think when we talk about development and the situation that we were in before Amazon and then Amazon getting here, I was a little bit more cautious in terms of my reaction to landing Amazon. Yeah, it's great, it looks good, but we have to look at the impact on other folks as well, because when the economists are looking at, oh, well, it's just a slight 1% change in this, or it's just a 2% change here or there, well, those are people's lives, right? And I think it's going to be very key in the way we look at not just displacement, because I don't want to be displacing people. I think within both our jurisdictions, we have the potential to do development in phases, right? So if we build something in a space where there isn't someone living there, and then we start moving people into those spaces. And when we're creating those spaces, like Councilman Chapman had brought up, it's not just a unit, it's not just a rental space, it's ownership, it's investment in the space, it's investment in the community. Tenants and Workers United put out a study recently, and they showed the majority of the people that live in Arlandria have been there for 20+ years. So, I mean, this is a community that is deeply rooted, deeply invested, and as a city, I feel that it's our responsibility to honor that investment that they've had. So, again, thank you for bringing that up.
Four minutes.
So,
I just want to make sure, is there anything else you want to put on the table right now?
well,
for the
I guess, I don't know if it's, I'm going to put them on the spot, but back to the two marks for a second. And I guess, talk to us about how, having heard this conversation, you guys envision solving all this. Coming back to us as a step two, and what does that look like? And I know you haven't had a chance to consult, but I mean, you're both named. Yeah, I mean, I guess just talk to us about what step two, at least as you think about it.
They haven't been texting each other?
I hope so.
Well, I guess we've got a lot of I think different thoughts, but they all seem to kind of coalesce around kind of the original memo, and I think getting a kind of an updated document, one, and then two, probably if there was representatives or a couple of folks chosen, one from each, Arlington, Alexandria, two from each, whatever, that we could sit down with and then say, what do those next steps look like? What kind of is, if it's a task force, which would seem most logical next, easiest, quickest thing to do. Okay, what's the charge? What's the, and then we could get some feedback, and then as staff fill that in as a draft so people could look at it and respond to it.
I thought that was brilliant.
They're already thinking alike.
One thing I would add, which is that would be helpful for me, and I can't speak for Mark, which is that as we do that, as people come to the table and put pen to paper and put something down, to actually identify one particular concrete, specific to-do, like picking up on the point of immediacy, because while those conversations are taking place, to put a structure together and other things, which is that I think that the momentum we have here can be lost if we can't at least try to identify a tiny little victory over the next few months.
So is it time for us to close it out?
Yes,
All right.
you have 30 seconds.
She's funny. So I'll just say briefly, probably not briefly, just a couple of thoughts. One, I'm really grateful for this conversation, and not that I had any preordained outcome, but I'll just leave it to say that I'm pleased at the three consensus priorities of areas where we see a great opportunity to do some innovative work that has some great opportunity to help people. Housing, we got there, but just to put a finer point on it, this is not just about caring about housing affordability writ large. We already do that. We have structures that are dealing with that. And Chuck Bean, who's in the audience, I think says it better than anyone I've ever heard. When it comes to housing, Amazon may not necessarily be a key driver from a macro level. Our region has the kind of absorptive capacity, that's Chuck's word, to manage this kind of investment within the usual flows. What we're talking about here is something very, very different. It is the very micro effects of how this investment can impact communities closest and proximate to HQ2 Potomac Yard. We know that a lot of those communities are made up of low and moderate income families who are incredibly vulnerable to this kind of displacement pressure. So, for me, the focus is really on preventing the involuntary displacement of people who have made this community their home in areas that are most impacted by a market, which if left, if we don't engage in that market, we're going to be too late to do anything. There's a great deal of question as to how much the the skyrocketing valuation of homes on Zillow in response. There's a lot of question as to how real that all is, but what I believe to be true is when displacement pressures occur, we will be too slow to deal with them if we're just simply being reactive. So how do we shape the market as opposed to being reactive to it? A key element is not just policies and land use tools, all of those are important. Key thing is going to be finance, how we actually are able to put dollars together. I think there's innovative work that our jurisdictions can do together that we cannot do separately, or that we can do less effectively separately. So I think a key immediate area for us is to really figure out how we can develop some financial capacity to deal with those displacement efforts. Similarly, workforce. I am so excited about this as an opportunity to do something different, because remember what we said when we attracted all of this. One of the ways in which this all works is if the number of people who work at Amazon or the businesses catalyzed by Amazon live nearby. They don't have to be relocated from elsewhere, not only from around the country, but also within the region. So we need to figure out how to get people who are unemployed and underemployed to get those jobs. Whether they be at Amazon, whether they be at the retail establishments that ring all of these commercial developments, or that are part of the many other jobs that are catalyzed by Amazon. And engaging with those employers to figure out what are the skills, what are the certifications, what are the competencies that people need in order to be attractive candidates is something that we can do this. I really do believe it's going to require working with the private sector in ways in which we probably haven't before, and then making sure we've got the programs and the partnerships to help get those people to be not only employment ready for those industries, but really the most attractive candidates overall. So I just see great optimism and great hope. I think this conversation has been affirming from a lot of the promise that Mayor and I had from the very beginning. So I thank you all for this. I thank the Marks. Even though we can't put specificity to what you're going to do, it's going to be a lot. So I thank you in advance. Certainly want to thank everyone who's attending tonight, but I do want to give a particular shout out to the clerk's office in the Arlington County Board office, counterparts in the city of Alexandria. There's a lot of work that went into taking this place, which is a gathering for people to recreate and do community center uses, to make it suitable for our gathering here tonight, including, I'm sure, running a whole lot of AV in a place that really wasn't built for it. So I'd really like to thank all the people who worked behind the scenes without fanfare to make this evening happen, and turn it over to my esteemed colleague for the last word.
All right. Well, first of all, first things first, the Mystics just tied it up at 76-76 with 7 minutes left. And the Nats are down 3-1 in the top of the fifth. Max Scherzer hasn't been performing as well as we have so far in this.
You put people in a
meeting.
bad mood before
I'm
your
sorry,
closing remarks.
that's why I included the Mystics score. The Mystics narrowed the gap. They've been down by as much as 11 so far. So, all right. Let me say a couple things. First of all, I echo everything Christian said. I want to thank everyone for being a part of this. And I had this panic last night that we were going to get in here, Ray was going to start, and nobody was going to say anything. And that was not the case. We didn't have any problem with that. I think it was a really good discussion. It was exactly what I was hoping we would get here. I think the only thing I want to kind of add to what Christian said. Like we've said from the beginning here, there's nothing magical about the border. 4 Mile Run does look a lot better now that we've done some great collaboration, but there's nothing really magical about it. And I think our residents don't think of it as a significant divider between our communities, and I think our policy needs to do the same. And I think the structure is obviously an important part of this, but I think we also have to acknowledge that the structure is going to evolve over time. And I think to one of the Mark's points, let's get something put together. Let's start moving ahead. Probably it's going to be the path of least organizational barriers, and just get something in place and get working. And then it'll probably evolve over time. And I think the groups, whatever, the people that we bring into this discussion will help us evolve that. I think the point that Mo made, and I believe Matt and Elizabeth both made, this is also a really cool opportunity for us to bring a lot of new voices into this discussion in a way that I think is going to drive us to some different policy answers, which will be good. We need the experts too. We need the folks that we call on from our boards and commissions and all the normal suspects. But I think we also have an opportunity here to really involve a lot of communities that haven't been previously. In the end, I think while there is risk, there is challenges, there are things that we are concerned about this. The one thing that's great and exciting about this is that we're shining a light on some of these issues. There is an attention and a willingness to tackle them, and I think tackle new ways of thinking about these things. And we just have to seize those opportunities, because those opportunities are going to be fleeting. And I think we have to be prepared, and we have to build a structure so that we can seize those opportunities. And the good news is there's not only people cheering us on, but I think there's organizations out there that want to be a part of this. They really want to, both financially and organizationally, they want to be a part of this and support these efforts, because I think they know that, whether we like it or not, we have basically made ourselves a laboratory here. And I think we can do some experimenting that I think ultimately will become an example for everyone, not only in this region, but around the world, to Libby's point. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all for everyone who helped organize this. And we got a lot of work to do, but it's a good start. What's that? They might have want to start Corbin. Oh, really? I mean, I think it's almost a no-brainer. You got to prove that. Really? But it's just. I thought it would have been a good idea to go with the hot hand. They lose. They're going to be questioning that forever. And he has settled down, so he's. Oh.